General Rigel cackled gleefully at the tiny, weak soldiers stepping off the shuttle, not realizing one of them was a human who would soon turn his entire world upside down. The remote planet Eridani 6 was home to a brutal Jem'Hadar military outpost, where visiting soldiers would train under the cruelest, most unforgiving conditions in the galaxy. General Rigel, the battle-scarred leader of the outpost, scrutinized the frail forms of the Vulcan, Andorian, and Tellarite representatives as they shuffled onto the blood-stained dirt, but his eyes narrowed into cruel slits when he saw Christian Webb. The only human, the one Rigel would break first. Webb stood at rigid attention, ignoring the general's mocking laughter as Rigel circled him like a hungry predator. "I think I'll start with you, human," Rigel sneered, mandibles clicking. "Your kind are so soft and pathetic. I can't wait to watch you fail every single challenge." The other soldiers exchanged nervous glances, mandibles and antennae twitching. But Webb didn't flinch, even as Rigel's serrated claws brushed his neck. Webb just met the general's compound eyes and said in an unwavering voice, "I look forward to exceeding your expectations, sir." Rigel snarled and shoved Webb toward the outpost's blast doors. Webb knew that the only way to secure humanity a vital alliance with the Jem'Hadar was to be the last soldier standing at the end of the deadly training. Failure meant the Jem'Hadar would continue to see humans as worthless fodder, undeserving of respect or trade. Everything was riding on Webb's shoulders. One human facing a military outpost full of the most lethal warriors in the quadrant, warriors who would not hesitate to kill him. The blast doors slammed shut behind Webb with a resounding clang. There was no turning back now. The visiting soldier's eyes bulged, seeing the obstacle course General Rigel set before them. There were razor wires strung between poles, a mud pit scattered with barbed wire, and a wood wall 6 meters high. The soldiers would have to scale it, with heavy packs strapped to their backs. Webb scanned the treacherous course, sweat dripping off his forehead under the sweltering Eridani 6 sun. But his face betrayed no fear. General Rigel paced in front of the soldiers, mandibles clicking together in a cruel laugh. "You will run this course until you collapse from exhaustion, and then you will get up and run it again. I don't care if your bones break or your lungs bleed. There is no room for weakness here." The Andorian and Tellarite soldiers exchanged nervous glances, antennae and snouts twitching, but Webb just nodded curtly. "Understood, sir." Rigel's compound eyes narrowed. He shoved his serrated claw into Webb's chest. "I'll be watching you closely, human. Your kind have no place here, and I'll prove it." Webb didn't flinch. He met Rigel's glare and said, "I won't let you down, sir." At Rigel's barked command, the soldiers took off, scrambling through the razor wire and hauling themselves over the wood wall. Webb pushed himself harder, ignoring the wire tearing into his flesh and the weight of the pack crushing his shoulders. He clambered up the wall, muscles burning, and leaped down the other side. The obstacle course seemed to stretch on forever, but Webb never slowed. He crawled through the mud, barbed wire scraping his face, and forced himself to keep moving. The Vulcan and Tellarite soldiers began to lag behind, limbs trembling from fatigue. But Webb refused to break. Rigel watched Webb, mandibles clenched tight. The human was outpacing the others. Rigel couldn't allow it. He stormed over to the course and hurled a metal pole at Webb's legs, trying to trip him. Webb lurched to the side just in time, the pole missing him by centimeters. The Andorian soldier gasped, "Is the general trying to hurt Webb?" Rigel snarled and grabbed the Andorian by the throat. "You will not question me. I am in command here." The soldier choked out an apology. Rigel dropped him and turned his fury on Webb. The human had already moved on, scaling the wall for the 10th time, his blood staining the wood. Rigel clenched his fists, a plan forming in his mind. A plan to get rid of this human once and for all. As the grueling training continued, Webb found himself alone in the barracks during a brief rest period. He sat on his bunk, head in his hands, trying to make sense of Rigel's increasingly erratic and dangerous behavior. The sound of footsteps made Webb lift his head. It was Tyranitar, one of the younger Jem'Hadar soldiers. The alien warrior hesitated in the doorway before stepping inside. "Webb, I need to talk to you," Taranatar said, his voice low and urgent. Webb straightened, surprised by the Jem'Hadar's approach. "What is it, Taranatar?" Taranatar glanced over his shoulder, mandibles clicking nervously. "Not here, follow me." Intrigued, Webb stood and followed Taranatar out of the barracks. The Jem'Hadar led him to a secluded spot behind the training grounds, hidden from view. Taranatar turned to face Webb, his compound eyes flickering with a mix of fear and determination. "There's something you need to know about the Jem'Hadar," Taranatar began. "We're not a naturally occurring species. We were created by an ancient race called the Founders." Webb's eyes widened. "Created? What do you mean?" "The Founders genetically engineered us to serve as their army," Taranatar explained. "And they control us through a drug called Ketracel White. We're addicted to it from birth." A chill ran down Webb's spine. "Why are you telling me this?" Taranatar's mandibles clicked together. "I suspect that General Rigel has been manipulating the supply of Ketracel White. He's using it to control us, to fuel his own ambitions." Webb's mind raced, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Rigel's hostility towards him, the brutal training exercises, the secretive nature of the outpost. It all made sense now. "This information could be the key to understanding Rigel's behavior," Webb said, "and the true purpose of this cultural exchange program." Taranatar nodded. "We need to investigate further. But we must be careful if Rigel finds out—" Webb clasped Taranatar's shoulder. "We'll watch each other's backs. We'll get to the bottom of this." As they continued their clandestine conversations, Webb and Taranatar began to uncover a sinister plot that threatened not only the visiting soldiers, but the entire Jem'Hadar race. They dug deeper, piecing together scraps of information and whispered rumors. But their investigation did not go unnoticed. General Rigel's compound eyes followed Webb's every move, mandibles clicking with suspicion. The tension within the outpost reached a boiling point, and Webb found himself in a dangerous game of cat and mouse. He didn't know who he could trust anymore. Every Jem'Hadar soldier was a potential threat, loyal to Rigel and the Founders, and Rigel himself. Webb shuddered to think how far the general would go to maintain his grip on power. But he couldn't back down now. Too much was at stake. He had to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. Webb and Taranatar huddled over a stolen datapad in a secluded corner of the barracks, their faces illuminated by the flickering screen. They scrolled through intercepted transmissions, their eyes widening with each damning piece of evidence. "Look at this," Taranatar hissed, pointing to a message. "Rigel is reporting directly to someone called the Overseer. He's feeding them information about the cultural exchange program." Webb's jaw clenched as he read the message. The Overseer, they're a founder, aren't they? One of the ones who created the Jem'Hadar. Taranatar nodded grimly. "And it seems they have plans for us. Plans to use the Jem'Hadar to conquer the other races, with Rigel as their puppet." Webb's fist slammed into the wall, frustration and anger boiling over. "We can't let that happen. We have to stop them." Taranatar's compound eyes met Webb's unwavering. "We will, but we can't do it alone." Over the next few days, Webb and Taranatar reached out to the other visiting soldiers, pulling them aside during training exercises and whispering urgently in shadowed corners. They found allies in the Vulcan, Andorian, and Tellarite soldiers, who had also grown suspicious of Rigel's behavior. They also approached a few Jem'Hadar soldiers who had expressed doubts about Rigel's leadership, including a fierce warrior named Ikatika. Together, they formed a secret alliance, meeting in the dead of night to share information and devise a plan. "We need evidence," Webb said, his voice low and intense. "Something concrete that we can use to expose Rigel and the Overseer." Ikatika nodded. "I know where Rigel keeps his personal files. If we can access them, we might find the proof we need." But even as they plotted and planned, they couldn't let their guard down. They still had to participate in the grueling training exercises, pushing their bodies to the limit and following Rigel's increasingly erratic orders. Webb gritted his teeth as he crawled through a field of razor-sharp thorns, his skin shredding with every movement. Beside him, Tyranitar and the Andorian soldier, Shraz, struggled to keep pace. Rigel loomed over them, his eyes glinting with malice. "Faster, maggots! You think the enemy will wait for you to catch your breath?" Webb hauled himself to his feet, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. He met Rigel's gaze, careful to keep his expression neutral, even as rage simmered in his gut. They walked a tightrope every day, balancing their need to gather evidence with the risk of discovery. One wrong move, one careless whisper, and everything could come crashing down. But Webb knew they had no choice. The fate of not just the Jem'Hadar but the entire quadrant rested on their shoulders. He would do whatever it took to stop Rigel and the Overseer, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. As the days turned into weeks, Webb found himself taking on a leadership role within the Alliance. He drew upon his training as a human soldier, his experiences in countless battles and covert missions, to guide them through the treacherous landscape of the Jem'Hadar outpost. He taught them how to communicate without words, using subtle gestures and coded phrases. He showed them how to move silently through the shadows, evading Rigel's ever-watchful gaze, and he helped them to stay one step ahead of the Loyalists, anticipating their moves and countering them at every turn. But even as they made progress, the danger grew. Rigel's suspicions sharpened, his eyes narrowing whenever Webb and Tyranitar were together. The Overseer's demands became more insistent, their messages laced with barely concealed threats. Webb knew they were running out of time. They needed to act soon before Rigel and the Overseer could put their plan into motion, before the Jem'Hadar became an unstoppable force, conquering and enslaving the other races. He gathered the Alliance members in a darkened room, their faces illuminated by a single flickering light. They looked to him, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "We have to move now," Webb said, his voice tight with urgency. "We have to expose Rigel and the Overseer before it's too late." Tyranitar stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "We're with you, Webb, no matter what happens." The others nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. They knew the risks, knew that they might not all make it out alive, but they also knew that they had no choice. They were the only ones who could stop this nefarious plot, the only ones who could save the Jem'Hadar from becoming a tool of conquest and oppression, and they would do whatever it took to see it through. Webb took a deep breath, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. "Then let's get to work." Webb's eyes narrowed as he scanned the stolen data on the pad's flickering screen. His heart pounded, a cold sweat beading on his brow. The truth slammed into him with the force of a photon torpedo. "This cultural exchange," Webb's voice shook with barely contained fury. "It's all a ruse. The Founders are using it to exploit weaknesses in each of our species, to conquer us." Tyranitar clenched his fists, mandibles clicking. "We're nothing but pawns to them, expendable tools." The Vulcan soldier, T'Prile, spoke with her usual calm detachment, but an undercurrent of anger simmered beneath. The Founders' actions are not only unethical but illogical. Conquest through deception will only breed further conflict. Shraz, the Andorian, slammed his fist against the wall. "We can't let them get away with this. We have to warn our governments." Webb stood, his jaw set. Shraz is right. Exposing Rigel's treachery isn't enough. We need to get this intel back to Starfleet, the Andorian Imperial Guard, the Vulcan High Command, and the Tellarite Assembly. "But how?" Tyranitar asked. "Rigel's watching our every move, and now with Ikatika here—" As if summoned by his name, the door to their hidden meeting place burst open, revealing the imposing figure of Ikatika, flanked by a squad of heavily armed Jem'Hadar. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Ikatika's eyes glinted with malice. "A little gathering of traitors?" Webb stepped forward, shielding the others. "We're no traitors, Ikatika. We're trying to stop a great injustice." "Silence, human," Ikatika backhanded Webb across the face, sending him sprawling. "You will address me as first, and you will submit to the Founder's will." Tyranitar helped Webb to his feet, blood trickling from the human's split lip. Webb spat, staining the ground crimson. "So I won't be a party to genocide," Webb growled. "None of us will." Ikatika's soldiers aimed their weapons, the hum of charging plasma filling the air. "Then you will die." In that moment, Webb knew they had to act. It was now or never. He locked eyes with Tyranitar, a silent understanding passing between them. "Now!" Webb shouted. T'Pril and Shra sprang into action, their Starfleet combat training kicking in. T'Pril nerve-pinched the nearest Jem'Hadar, while Shra grappled with another, wrenching the soldier's gun from his hands. Webb and Tyranitar charged Ikatika, a flurry of punches and kicks. The towering Jem'Hadar commander was a formidable opponent, his genetically enhanced strength and speed making him a blur of motion. But Webb and Tyranitar fought with the desperate ferocity of those with everything to lose. They worked in tandem, Webb distracting Ikatika with a series of rapid jabs, while Tyranitar swept the commander's legs out from under him. Ikatika crashed to the ground but rolled swiftly to his feet. He lunged at Webb, serrated claws slashing. Webb dodged, the razor-sharp talons missing his face by centimeters. Tyranitar seized the opportunity, locking Ikatika in a chokehold from behind. The commander thrashed and snarled, but Tyranitar held fast, his arm a band of iron around Ikatika's throat. Meanwhile, T'Pril and Shra had dispatched the other soldiers, a pile of unconscious bodies littering the floor. They hurried to secure the exit, watching for any sign of reinforcements. Ikatika's struggles weakened, his face turning a mottled shade of purple. Webb nodded at Tyranitar, who released his hold, letting the commander slump to the ground, unconscious but alive. "Quick, we don't have much time." Webb brushed the blood from his chin. "We need to disable the outpost's defenses and create a distraction so we can steal a ship." Tyranitar retrieved his hidden stash of confiscated weapons, handing a phaser rifle to Webb. "I'll take care of the distraction. I know this outpost's weak points." Webb gripped Tyranitar's shoulder. "Be careful." The Jem'Hadar nodded. "You too, my friend." T'Pril and Shra fell into step beside Webb as they raced down the corridor, the sounds of shouting and alarm klaxons blaring in their ears. They ducked into alcoves to avoid patrolling soldiers, hearts pounding as they inched closer to the hangar bay. Suddenly an explosion rocked the outpost, the floor bucking beneath their feet. Webb grinned fiercely. Tyranitar had come through. Taking advantage of the chaos, they sprinted the final stretch, bursting into the hangar. A sleek black ship awaited them, its hatch open and inviting. But as they neared the vessel, a figure stepped from the shadows. General Rigel, his eyes wild and a plasma rifle clutched in his clawed hands. "Going somewhere?" the general hissed, mandibles quivering with rage. Webb raised his own weapon, aiming it squarely at Rigel's chest. "Stand down, Rigel, it's over." The general laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Over? No, human, it's only just begun." He fired, a searing bolt of plasma streaking towards them. Webb dove to the side, the heat of the blast singeing his hair. T'Pril and Shra scattered, seeking cover behind crates and equipment. Webb rolled to his feet, firing back. The hangar erupted into a firefight, plasma bolts crisscrossing the space like deadly fireflies. Rigel was a crack shot, his genetically engineered reflexes making him a formidable adversary, but Webb was a seasoned soldier, battle-hardened and determined. He advanced, laying down suppressing fire as T'Pril and Shra flanked the general from either side. Caught in the crossfire, Rigel snarled, his shots going wide. Webb closed the distance until he was mere feet from the general. "Surrender, Rigel," Webb commanded, his voice steely. "You've lost." The general's eyes flashed with hatred. "Never." He lunged, tackling Webb to the ground. They grappled, rolling across the hangar floor in a tangle of limbs. Rigel's claws raked Webb's face, drawing blood. But Webb fought back, hammering his fists into the general's midsection. With a mighty heave, Webb threw Rigel off him. The general crashed into a stack of crates, his rifle skittering away. Webb staggered to his feet, aiming his phaser at Rigel's head. "Stay down!" Rigel glared up at him, defiance etched in every line of his face. But he made no move to rise. T'Pril and Shras emerged from their cover, weapons trained on the fallen general. Webb nodded to them, a silent thanks. Just then Taranatar burst into the hangar, his armor scorched and dented. "We need to go now, reinforcements are on the way." Webb hauled Rigel to his feet, shoving him towards the waiting ship. "Get in, you're coming with us." The general hissed but complied, stumbling up the ramp under the watchful eyes of T'Pril and Shras. Webb turned to Taranatar. "What about you? Come with us." The Jem'Hadar shook his head. "I can't. My place is here with my people. I need to spread the truth to let them know they have a choice." Webb clasped Taranatar's arm, a warrior's embrace. "Good luck, my friend. Give them hell." Taranatar returned the gesture. "I will. Now go before it's too late." With a final nod, Webb sprinted up the ramp, the hatch sealing shut behind him. He slid into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship lifted off, its engines roaring to life. Plasma bolts pinged off the hull as Jem'Hadar soldiers flooded into the hangar, firing wildly. But it was too late. The vessel shot forward, bursting through the hangar doors and into the star-studded expanse of space. Webb punched in the coordinates for the nearest Starfleet outpost, his heart racing. They had done it. They had escaped, and with the evidence they needed to expose the Founders' nefarious plot. But the battle was far from over. As the ship hurtled through the void, Webb knew that their fight had only just begun. The Founders would stop at nothing to keep their plans secret, to crush any resistance. But Webb and his allies would be ready. They would fight tooth and nail to protect their people and to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The ship shuddered as it hit warp speed, the stars blurring into streaks of light. Webb leaned back in his seat, his gaze locked on the viewport. Rigel sat in the rear of the cockpit, bound and seething. The general's eyes burned with hatred, his mandibles clicking furiously against his restraints. T'Pril monitored the ship's sensors, her slender fingers dancing over the console. "No sign of pursuit, but I am detecting increased activity from the outpost." Shras manned the weapons systems, his antennae quivering with tension. "They'll be after us soon enough. We need to get this information to our people as quickly as possible." Webb nodded, his jaw set. "Agreed, but first we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Rigel." He swiveled his chair to face the captive general. "It's time for you to start talking." Rigel spat, his saliva sizzling on the deck plates. "I will tell you nothing, human. You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable. The Founders will crush you, and your pathetic little worlds will burn." Webb stood, his eyes hard as flint. He crossed the cockpit in 2 strides, looming over the general. "We'll see about that." He grabbed Rigel by the front of his armor, hauling him to his feet. The general struggled, but Webb's grip was iron. "So you're going to tell us everything," Webb growled. "Every detail of the Founders' plan, every weakness in their defenses, and if you don't—" He let the threat hang in the air, his gaze boring into Rigel's. The general met his stare with equal intensity, a battle of wills playing out in the cramped confines of the cockpit. Seconds ticked by, the tension mounting. T'Pril and Shras watched, their weapons at the ready. Finally, Rigel's shoulders slumped, a flicker of defeat in his eyes. "Very well, human, I will tell you what you want to know. But it changes nothing. You are still doomed." Webb shoved Rigel back into his seat. "We'll take our chances. Now start talking." As Rigel began to speak, his words spilling out in a mix of anger and resignation, Webb felt a flicker of hope. They had struck a blow against the Founders today, had thrown a wrench into their plans. But he knew it was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and perilous, fraught with danger at every turn. They would need every ounce of courage, every shred of determination to see this through. But they would not falter. They could not. The fate of their worlds, of the entire quadrant, hung in the balance. And Webb would be damned if he let the Founders win. He settled back into the pilot's chair, his gaze fixed on the stars streaking past the viewport. They had a long way to go, and time was running out. But they would make it. They had to. Failure was not an option. As they raced through the star-studded expanse, Webb's mind churned with desperation. They were running out of time, and Rigel's venomous words still echoed in his ears. The Founders' plan was already in motion, and every moment they spent fleeing was another moment their people were left vulnerable. Webb turned to Tyranitar, his eyes hardening with resolve. "We need more time, more evidence. We can't go back to our worlds with just Rigel's word and a few scraps of data." Tyranitar's mandibles clicked in agreement. But how? Rigel will never give us what we need, and Ikatika's soldiers will be hunting us across the quadrant. A dangerous idea flickered in Webb's mind, a gambit so risky it bordered on madness. He stood, pacing the cramped cockpit. What if I challenged Rigel to a duel, the rite of ascension? T'Pril's eyebrow arched. The Jem'Hadar custom that allows a soldier to challenge their superior for their position? Webb nodded. If I win, it would throw the outpost into chaos, give you the chance to find the evidence we need. Tyranitar's eyes widened. You would be facing one of the most skilled warriors in the Dominion, and Ikatika would never let such a challenge go unanswered. I know the risks, Webb said, but what choice do we have? The fate of our worlds hangs in the balance. Shress leaned forward, antennae quivering. It could work. While all eyes are on the duel, we could infiltrate Rigel's private quarters, his command center, find the proof we need of his treachery. Tyranitar placed a hand on Webb's shoulder. If you're going to do this, you won't do it alone. I'll stand as your second. Webb clasped Tyranitar's arm, gratitude and fear warring in his gut. I couldn't ask for a better ally. T'Pril's fingers flew over the console, plotting a course back to the outpost. I estimate we have a 32.7% chance of success. But as you said, what choice do we have? As the ship banked hard, streaking back towards the danger they had so narrowly escaped, Webb felt a grim sense of purpose settle over him. He would train, he would fight, and he would win. For his people, for all their people. Or he would die trying. Word of Webb's challenge spread through the outpost like wildfire, sparking a frenzy of activity. Soldiers whispered in corners, placing bets and picking sides. Some scoffed at the human's audacity, sure that Rigel would crush him like an insect. Others, those who had seen Webb's skill and determination firsthand, wagered their rations on the underdog. Ikatika was a flurry of motion, rallying support for Rigel, reminding all who would listen of the general's unmatched record in the right. But even as he sang Rigel's praises, Ikatika's mind spun with schemes. This was an opportunity, a chance to prove his worth to the Founders, to position himself as the true power behind the outpost. Let Rigel and the human destroy each other. Ikatika would be waiting to seize control in the aftermath. Amidst the chaos, Webb and his allies moved like shadows. While Webb trained with Tyranitar, honing his skills and learning the intricacies of Jem'Hadar combat, T'Pril and Shress slipped through the outpost's defenses. They infiltrated command centers and private quarters, sifting through data files and communiques, piecing together the damning evidence of the Founders' plot. It was dangerous work, each moment fraught with the risk of discovery. But they persevered, driven by the knowledge that billions of lives depended on their success. And all the while, Webb pushed himself to the brink, his muscles screaming and his mind sharpening to a deadly edge. He would need every ounce of strength, every shred of cunning, to stand a chance against Rigel. The day of the duel dawned, the air crackling with tension. The outpost's central arena was packed, soldiers jostling for a view of the impending battle. Rigel stood in the center, a towering figure in sleek armor, his eyes glinting with malice. Ikatika hovered at his side, a serpent waiting to strike. Webb entered the arena, Tyranitar at his shoulder. The human was a study in focus, his face set and his steps sure. He knew the odds were against him. Rigel was stronger, faster, a product of generations of genetic engineering. But Webb had something Rigel could never understand, a fierce, unbreakable will forged in the fires of human spirit. He would fight not just for himself, but for his people, for the promise of a future free from the Founders' tyranny. As he faced Rigel, squaring off beneath the harsh lights of the arena, Webb felt a calm settle over him. In this moment, there was no fear, no doubt, only the clarity of purpose. "Begin," Ikatika's voice rang out. Rigel lunged, a blur of speed and savagery. And Webb met him head-on, the clash of their bodies signaling the start of a battle that would echo across the stars. But even as they fought, trading blows that would shatter bone and rupture flesh, Webb knew that the true battle was taking place in the shadows. His allies were the key, their mission the only hope for victory. He just had to give them the time they needed, even if it cost him everything. The crowd roared as Webb and Rigel stepped into the arena, the force field shimmering around them. Rigel twirled his Kartaken, the curved blade glinting under the harsh lights. He sneered at Webb, mandibles clicking in derision. "They'll think you can beat me, human, with that toy." Rigel gestured at Webb's simple staff. Webb settled into a fighting stance, the staff held loosely in his hands. "It's not the weapon, Rigel, it's the warrior who wields it." Rigel snarled and lunged, his blade slashing through the air. Webb sidestepped, the Kartaken missing him by centimeters. He whipped his staff around, cracking it against Rigel's back. The general stumbled, surprise flickering across his face. He whirled, attacking with renewed fury. But Webb was ready, parrying each blow with fluid grace. They danced across the arena, the clang of metal on metal ringing out. The crowd watched, stunned, as the human soldier held his own against the Jem'Hadar general. Rigel's face twisted with rage. His attacks grew wilder, more reckless. Webb remained calm, letting Rigel's anger work against him. He ducked under a wild swing, then swept Rigel's legs out from under him. The general crashed to the ground, his Kartaken skittering away. Webb stood over him, staff poised. "Yield." But before Rigel could respond, Ikatika's voice boomed across the arena. "The human cheats, he violates the rules of the right." Ikatika and his soldiers stormed the platform, weapons drawn. Webb spun to face them, staff at the ready. Taranatar and the other members of the Secret Alliance surged forward, engaging Ikatika's soldiers. The arena erupted into chaos, soldiers grappling and trading blows. In the confusion, Webb saw his chance. He signaled to his allies and they broke away, fighting their way towards the exit. They burst out of the arena, racing through the outpost's corridors. Alarms blared and soldiers shouted. Phaser fire sizzled past them, scorching the walls. Ikatika's voice crackled over the comms. "The human and his collaborators are traitors. Stop them at any cost." Webb and his team ran, the pound of pursuing feet growing louder behind them. They had to get off the outpost, had to warn their people of the Founders' treachery. But Ikatika's soldiers were closing in, determined to silence them forever. Webb gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on his staff. They would have to fight their way out or die trying. Webb and his allies sprinted through the shadowed corridors of the outpost, the pounding of their pursuers' feet echoing behind them. They burst into the central command center, a cavernous room filled with glowing consoles and flickering screens. "There!" Taranatar pointed to a nondescript door set into the far wall. "That's the hidden chamber." They raced across the room, Webb and Taranatar covering their rear with phaser fire. The door slid open, revealing a small, dimly lit space packed with advanced technology. Taranatar's fingers flew over the consoles, his eyes scanning the scrolling data. "I'm in. The Founders' plans, their targets. It's all here." A blaring alarm pierced the air. Webb whipped around, phaser raised. "They're coming." Outside, the sounds of battle erupted, phaser fire and the clash of blades, the rest of their alliance buying them precious time. Webb and Taranatar worked frantically, downloading the incriminating files onto a data device. As the progress bar inched forward, a new file caught Webb's eye. "Wait, what's this?" He enlarged the file, his eyes widening. "Rigel, he's alive and working with Ikatika." Taranatar leaned in, mandibles clicking in shock. "Not just working with him. Rigel's a key player in the Founder's plot. He wants to use the conquest of your worlds to establish himself as a power in the galaxy." The download completed with a chirp. Webb snatched the data device, tucking it into his uniform. "We have to get this information out of here." They emerged from the hidden chamber, phaser rifles at the ready. But instead of Ikatika's soldiers, they found themselves face to face with Rigel and Ikatika themselves. "Well, well," Rigel sneered, his car taken glinting in the dim light. "The human and the traitor, I should have known." Ikatika leveled his rifle at Webb's chest. "Surrender the data device and your deaths will be quick." Webb's mind raced, calculating the odds. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but the information they carried was too important. He had to buy time. "Rigel," Webb said, his voice steady, "I know the truth. About you, about the Founder's plot. You're not just a pawn, you're a key player." Rigel's eyes narrowed. "Clever, human, but it changes nothing. You cannot stop what is to come." "Maybe not," Webb admitted, "but we can expose it. We can make sure the galaxy knows the truth about you and your masters." Behind him, Taranatar shifted, ready to move on Webb's signal. The tension stretched, seconds feeling like hours. Then, from beyond the command center, a new sound. Phaser fire growing closer. Shouts of alarm from Jem'Hadar soldiers. Webb smiled grimly. "It seems our friends have arrived." In that moment of distraction, Webb and Taranatar moved. They dove to the side, rolling behind consoles as Rigel and Ikatika opened fire. The command center erupted into chaos, phaser beams crisscrossing the room. Webb and Taranatar returned fire, the acrid smell of ozone filling the air. "We need to get out of here," Webb shouted over the din. "Head for the hangar bay." They began to fight their way towards the exit, the data device secure in Webb's pocket. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales. As Webb stared down Rigel, he saw Taranatar tense out of the corner of his eye. In a flash, the Jem'Hadar launched himself at Ikatika, a blur of fists and fury. The two soldiers traded blows, grappling and striking with lightning speed. Webb shifted his stance subtly, angling himself into a more defensive posture. He kept his eyes locked on Rigel, but his body was coiled, ready to strike at the first opening. Taranatar and Ikatika slammed into the wall, the metal buckling under their weight. Taranatar drove his knee into Ikatika's gut, but the loyal soldier twisted, flipping Taranatar over his hip. Just as Taranatar rolled to his feet, the command center doors burst open. A squad of Jem'Hadar soldiers poured in, weapons raised. Webb spun, phaser firing, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. "Fall back," Webb shouted, laying down covering fire as Taranatar disengaged from Ikatika. They sprinted deeper into the command center, the loyal soldiers hot on their heels. Phaser blasts sizzled past Webb's head, scorching the walls. Taranatar slapped a control panel and a door hissed open. They dove through, the door slamming shut behind them. Webb turned, phaser ready, but stopped short. The room was filled with stasis pods, each one containing a Jem'Hadar soldier. Taranatar's eyes widened in recognition. "These are the Jem'Hadar from the experimental program, the super soldiers." Webb moved to the nearest pod, wiping condensation from the glass. The soldier inside was massive, his muscles bulging unnaturally, genetic enhancements. Beyond the door they could hear Ikatika's soldiers attempting to override the lock. They didn't have much time. "We have to wake them up," Webb said. "Turn them against Rigel and Ikatika. It's our only chance." Taranatar nodded grimly and began the awakening sequence. The pods hissed open, frigid air spilling out. The first soldier stepped out, his eyes snapping open. But instead of awaiting orders, the soldier lashed out, his fist connecting with Taranatar's jaw. Taranatar flew back, crashing into the pods. Webb fired his phaser, but the beam barely phased the super soldier. The Jem'Hadar advanced, his movements unnaturally fast. All around them more pods were opening, more enhanced soldiers emerging, and none of them were on Webb and Tyranitar's side. Webb dodged a crushing blow, the soldier's fist pulverizing the wall behind him. Tyranitar struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth. They were surrounded, the super soldiers closing in. Webb fired again and again, but it was like shooting at a geranium wall. Tyranitar seized a heavy pipe, swinging it like a club. It connected with a soldier's head with a sickening crunch. But the Jem'Hadar kept coming, unfazed. Outside they could hear Rigel's laughter, cruel and triumphant. Webb and Tyranitar stood back to back, weapons ready as the super soldiers advanced. They had walked into a trap of their own making. And now they would have to fight their way out or die trying. The super soldiers swarmed Webb and Tyranitar, their enhanced strength and speed making them nearly unstoppable. Webb ducked and weaved, narrowly avoiding a crushing blow that pulverized the wall behind him. He fired his phaser, the beam glancing off the soldier's armor. Tyranitar grappled with another soldier, his muscles straining as he fought to hold back the relentless assault. "Go!" he shouted at Webb. "Get the evidence. I'll hold them off." Webb hesitated for a split second, torn between helping his friend and completing the mission. But he knew Tyranitar was right. He had to secure the evidence, no matter the cost. With a final anguished look at Tyranitar, Webb turned and sprinted for the hidden chamber. He could hear the sounds of battle behind him, the grunts and cries of pain as Tyranitar fought against impossible odds. Webb burst into the chamber, his eyes scanning the room for the data device. There in the corner he spotted Rigel, hunched over a console, his fingers flying over the controls. "Step away from the console," Webb ordered, his phaser leveled at Rigel's back. Rigel stiffened, then slowly turned, a sneer on his face. Webb could see that the general was injured, his armor scorched and dented, blood seeping from a gash on his forehead. "You're too late, human," Rigel spat. "I've already begun the deletion sequence. In a few minutes all the evidence will be gone, and your precious alliance will have died for nothing." Webb's finger tightened on the trigger. "I won't let that happen." Rigel laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You can't stop it. The Founder's plan is already in motion. Even if you kill me, you've already lost." With a roar of fury, Rigel charged, a vibroblade appearing in his hand as if by magic. Webb fired, but Rigel was too fast, the blade slashing down towards Webb's throat. Webb parried the blow with his phaser, the two weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. They traded blows, Webb's human strength pitted against Rigel's Jem'Hadar enhancements. But Webb was driven by a desperate, unyielding determination. He fought with a savagery he had never known, his blows raining down on Rigel with relentless fury. Finally, with a mighty crack, Webb's phaser connected with Rigel's skull. The general crumpled, his vibroblade clattering to the floor. Webb staggered to the console, his fingers racing over the controls as he cancelled the deletion sequence. With seconds to spare, he snatched up the data device, the precious evidence safe in his grasp. But his triumph was short-lived. The station shuddered around him, alarms blaring, warning of the imminent self-destruct. Webb knew he had only moments to escape. He ran, his legs pumping, his lungs burning. He could hear the sounds of the super soldiers behind him, still fighting, still pursuing. Webb rounded a corner and saw his salvation, a single escape pod, its hatch open and waiting. With a final burst of speed, he dove inside, slamming his fist against the launch controls. The pod blasted free of the station, the force of the acceleration slamming Webb back against his seat. From the view screen, he watched as the outpost, along with the remaining super soldiers, Ikatika, and the fallen body of his friend Tyranitar, was consumed in a massive explosion. A wave of grief and exhaustion washed over Webb as the pod hurtled through space. The mission was accomplished, but the cost had been high. Too high. The pod shook violently as the shockwave from the explosion hit, sending it tumbling end over end. Webb clung to the evidence device, his knuckles white, as the pod's systems fought to stabilize the spin. Finally, the pod righted itself, the Earth growing larger in the view screen. Webb slumped back in his seat, his eyes closing as the adrenaline drained from his body. He had done it. He had exposed the Founder's plot and saved countless lives. But at what cost? Tyranitar was gone, sacrificed to Webb's mission, and Webb himself. He was a changed man, haunted by the things he had seen and done. As the pod began its final approach to Earth, Webb knew that his fight was far from over. The Founders were still out there, still plotting, still scheming, and he would be there to stop them, no matter the price. The pod touched down on the landing pad, a crowd of Starfleet officers and personnel already gathering around it. Webb took a deep breath, then opened the hatch, stepping out into the bright sunlight. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.